Welcome to Bye-pocalypse Part 1. Tyler and I are here today with the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. We are going to be breaking down starts and sits from every matchup, a different change of format for you today. Tyler, give me a word. Lucas does this, throws us on the spot. Give me one word to describe how you're feeling about the upcoming week.
Worried. Worried. Just between all the teams on bye, there are too many injuries to count at this point. We are scraping the barrel this week, and it's got me very, very worried because, man, it never feels good when your good stud players are either on bye or hurt. It's never a good feeling.
That pretty much just sums it up. It's just very worried, but don't you worry, because we got you covered. Like I said, starts and sits from each matchup this week, and we're gonna have to fly through because we got so many players, 26 plus players to talk about. So Ty, let's just jump right in and not waste any more time. We're going to start quickly with Jacksonville versus New Orleans. You're getting this on Thursday. This is the Thursday night game, right? There is a chance that when you're listening to this, that this game has already happened. So if so, just pretend like we talked about everything, right? And just move on. If it's not Thursday night football yet, make sure you listen up because we got the advice you need. But Tyler, in this game, who is someone that you are? Well, let's start with the sit first, actually. Who is the sit in this one?
Unfortunately, going to be Trevor Lawrence. We have. I go back to the beginning of last year, beginning of this season, and we were very optimistic on Trevor Lawrence, thinking that this could be another step forward year for him, and it just has not been. He's currently the quarterback 19 in fantasy points per game, and he has only one game with over 16 and a half fantasy points. Everything else has been in the 15 to 16 range. So it's not been good. And now on top of that, we're dealing with a slight knee sprain. And while he did express some optimism about playing per Ian Rappaport at Rap Sheet on Twitter, I don't really like it. And then the matchup too against New Orleans on the road. I just don't think there's any legitimate reason as to why Trevor Lawrence should be in your starting lineups this week.
For sure. And there, like you said, there is a chance that Trevor Lawrence is out. If we look at the New Orleans side of it, we are for sure starting Alvin Kamara. You're for sure starting Chris Olave. If you have Michael Thomas, like we said, it might be the Bye-pocalypse. You might have to start Michael Thomas this week. On the Jaguars side, you're for sure starting Travis Etienne. But like you said, there's a chance that Trevor Lawrence doesn't even suit up for this one. So who is going to be the back quarterback? Trevor Lawrence isn't suiting up for that.
It should be CJ Beathard. I will confirm, but it should be CJ Beathard.
So you're not excited, right? It's not like a Teddy Bridgewater who can just step in. So Tyler, I'm going to give you a couple names real quick. Are you starting Calvin Ridley then? If Trevor Lawrence is out,
I still would. You're just dropping your expectations have to be lowered, obviously. But again, 8 targets the past 2 games. He's more of a flex than he is a wide receiver too, if anything.
For sure. Christian Kirk.
You still start him.
And then the last guy we'll spend a little more time on is Evan Ingram. Are you starting Evan Ingram this week?
I do like Evan Ingram. And if I'm honest, I kind of like Evan Ingram more than the other 2 guys this week. Evan Ingram of all tight ends, he's 5th in target share. So not only is he super involved in his offense, he gets looked at a lot in his offense. And the reason for optimism for me with Evan Ingram is that his ADOT is only 4.3 yards, which on the surface, you're like, that's disgusting. Yeah. And it is. It's the lowest of any tight end in the top 20 in fantasy football this year. But the reason why I'm optimistic about that is because, not to put a safety valve label on Evan Ingram, but like, if there is somebody that CJ Beathard just has to get the ball to, it's going to be Evan Ingram or Christian Kirk. And I think Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk can be heavily looked at because of that with CJ Beathard. Again, Ridley is still going to get his targets because it's Calvin Ridley. Okay,
Mhm.
don't bet against the talent of Calvin Ridley. But I like I said, I sneakily like Evan Ingram this week more than the other pass catching options in Jacksonville.
For sure. And we've seen that a lot with both backup and rookie quarterbacks. Obviously, CJ Beathard is a backup quarterback in this case, but they do tend to lean on the tight ends at least a little bit more when they are filling in. This next game is going to be gross. This next game, Las Vegas versus Chicago, we could have a game without either starting quarterback. Justin Fields is doubtful. Jimmy Garoppolo left last game in an ambulance, right? So there just isn't a lot of optimism for this game. Guys that you're still obviously going to start. You got to start Josh Jacobs in this one. You got to start Devontae Adams. You got to start DJ Moore more than likely. Jacoby Myers, I would lean towards you have to start, especially what we've seen when Brian Hoyer was in last week. But Tyler, who is one of these non-obvious guys that you're looking to start in this disgusting Vegas for Chicago game?
I like Roschon Johnson in what should be his first game in a major role in the offense, especially when Justin Fields is going to be out. So there's a potential to be a little more reliant on the run game. So far this year, Vegas is top 12 in fantasy points per game to running backs, in rushing yards allowed, rushing touchdowns, receptions. It is a pretty good matchup for Roschon Johnson. Deonta Foreman, probably not this week, just because Roschon should be back. But I'm a big fan of Roschon this week against Vegas.
For sure. The Bears made it very clear that Roschon is the back they're going to lean on over Deonta Foreman when he is healthy, right? I mean, Deonta Foreman was a healthy scratch before they needed to play him last week. Another player I want to talk about is Cole Kmet, right? Cole Kmet is a tight end that some people probably have been leaning on a little bit. That connection with Justin Fields has been pretty good, I'll say. It's been decent, right? I mean, he's had some great weeks, and he's still prone to having those real low single-digit weeks. But let's be honest, all tight ends outside the top 5 are really. I mean, that's just who you get. But in this week, there's probably a 98% chance he's not going to have Justin Fields. Are you looking towards Cole Kmet at all, or is this just I want nothing to do with it?
I just want nothing really to do with it. And this may be Cole Kmet may be one of those players this week where you go, well, it's Bye-pocalypse, and I don't really want to start anyone else. And Cole Kmet has done pretty well the past couple of weeks, and I'd still urge you to not play Cole Kmet. I get that, again, backup quarterback and tight ends have some kind of what's the correlation in terms of just usage and whatnot. But Cole Kmet, even when Tyson Bagent came in last week against Minnesota, Cole Kmet had 0 targets. Like, I feel like if there's going to be one guy that Tyson Bagent, and I really should say, we don't even know if it's going to be Tyson Bagent. I know it points to it, but for all we know, Nathan Peterman could be announced as the starter like Saturday afternoon, like for all we know. But if there's one guy that either of those quarterbacks are going to be looking at, it's going to be DJ Moore. So I would strongly urge to stay away from Cole Kmet this week.
Yeah, I would say other than probably Roschon Johnson and Josh Jacobs, you should have expectations tempered to stay the least for everyone in this matchup.
Everyone.
It's gonna be gross. I would not tune in even if I was a Bears or Raiders fan this week. That's how gross this game is gonna be.
Conveniently playing your grocery shopping trip during this game.
Yeah. NFL Red Zone probably won't be showing this.
No, they will.
Now that I say it, it's gonna be like touchdown. I mean, it's gonna be like a 42-45 game. That's how this game is going to be. It's either going to be like 45-48 or it's going to be like 3-6. There is going to be no in between with this one. Speaking of a game that could be pretty low scoring, we got Cleveland versus Indianapolis, and this Cleveland defense has been something else this year. Held Brock Purdy to 125 passing yards last week, beat San Francisco with PJ Walker at quarterback. Tyler, how does that make you feel about these Indianapolis wide receivers?
Worried, I guess. Like this not only is the secondary good for Cleveland, their pass rush is amazing. I mean,
Amazing.
like I don't understand how like I am saying this as a Vikings fan, how like we could have gone through all last year with zero pressure on quarterbacks with our defensive line. And then it seems like literally every other drop back, a quarterback facing this Cleveland defensive line is getting pressured. I don't know how. It just it is what it is, I guess. But I this defense is just so good. And there's really no one I can really trust on the Colts this week, especially when it comes to the receivers. Like, you still have to play Michael Pittman because Michael Pittman is just their number one guy. But Josh Downs, who was a very popular topic the last couple of weeks based on his target share and whatnot, I don't think you can play him this week. Like, I don't trust it. Don't trust it at all.
Yeah, I think moving on rest of the season, Josh Jones is a guy that you'll be glad that you picked up off the waiver wire.
Mhm.
But like you said, this is not the week for it. This team has shut everybody down. Other than really Brandon Ayuk last week had 5 for 75, but I think he's the best performance they've had. So
yeah. I mean, George Pickens had like 4 for 10,
yeah,
but he had like 100 yards and a touchdown only because it was a busted coverage,
yep.
right? Like,
yes. So and with Josh Downs, you're not going to get that, right? That's what I mean. Michael Pittman, he's a big guy. He can make plays happen. Josh Downs is a guy he's going to be a volume hog. On the other side of the ball, we might be seeing PJ Walker. We might be seeing Deshaun Watson. I think Amari Cooper showed last week that no matter who the quarterback is, you're starting him.
well,
other than
Dorian Thompson-Robinson,
but it's not going to be him.
It's not. It shouldn't be him.
But this backfield has raised some question marks last week, right? We saw a split that we really haven't seen since Jerome Ford took over with Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford. So I'm going to now ask you about the running backs on the Cleveland side. Are you starting both? Are you starting neither? Are you trying to pick one? What are you doing with that?
I think you still start Jerome Ford. I mean, he did lead the backfield in touches, even with the uptick in snaps for Kareem Hunt. So you still start him, especially when, Indy is allowing the 9th most fantasy points to running backs on the year. So obviously, it's Jerome Ford you're still starting, but it's really Kareem Hunt that you got to ask the question. And it's, again, with his uptick in snaps, he did find the end zone. He did, and he had 3 receptions on top of it. So maybe this is going to be something I ask you because I just don't really want to answer this question. But does Kareem Ford have some sneaky flex value this week?
Kareem Ford?
That's
gonna be
that's a helmet. They got me so flustered I can't even get their names right. No, is Kareem Hunt a sneaky flex option this week?
I think if we're starting to get a little more desperate, I think he is. And that's got a lot to do with running backs haven't been super deep this year to begin with, right? We're not a super deep. And then a ton of running backs are either out or on bye this week. I know we were talking beforehand. I have a dynasty team where I have Christian McCaffrey, Joe Mixon, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams, and Ramondre Stevenson. And this week, I may have to be starting Ramondre Stevenson and A.J. Dillon or Kenneth Gainwell, right? I mean, it's not like I've got 5 starting running backs and I only maybe have 1 this week. So I understand that if you're in that position, I'm picking Kareem Hunt over like a random Ravens running back. I think if you're looking at backup running backs, I don't really know if there's any other backup running back right now. Over Zach Moss, I would start Kareem Hunt this week, knowing that Zach Moss goes up against this Cleveland run defense, who is giving up, let's see, the 7th least amount of points to running backs right now, right there. If I'm picking, he's probably the best of like that running back 3 tier that you were going to have to start dipping into for this week.
Yeah. I mean, you take a look at other like running back 2s for other teams and stuff. Like, I mean, Chicago, you're not playing Deonta Foreman. Indy, you're not playing Zach Moss.
How about Tyler Algier?
That was one, but I don't like the matchup against Tampa.
I would agree.
Jaylen Warren against the Rams, only in PPR.
Yeah.
Arizona, not touching neither of them.
Yeah.
Seattle, Charbonnet, probably not.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I don't think it is that it's not that surprising, and it is not that weird to say that Kareem Hunt is the best running back too, and he may actually have ample opportunity in this game.
For sure. I would agree with that. All right, our next matchup, Buffalo versus New York. This game.
New York, helmet to you, sir.
New England. I knew who I was talking about too. Like I was picturing the Patriots in my head. Man, that I just saw that and it went New York. But yeah, so this is always a matchup that you really don't know what's going to happen, right? Josh Allen could throw 4 interceptions. Josh Allen could beat him 41-10. It could be a 14-7 game. Like I feel like with Buffalo, New England these last couple of years, it's just been all over the map.
All over the map.
So, I mean, you're obviously starting Josh Allen. You're obviously starting Stephon Diggs. But I don't feel like there's any more obvious starts in this game. There's a couple of guys who are probably on the fringe. Let's start with one of them. Let's start on the New England side with Ramondre Stevenson.
This one I'm so torn on because we saw the touches and the opportunity come back last week for Ramondre, and you look at the matchup and you go, Buffalo on paper, not great, but Buffalo's allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to running backs. They're allowing the 6th most over the last 2 weeks. But I keep coming back to the idea and the thought of like, we could see no volume again for Ramondre. Like that might be a game plan. And if that's a game plan, first and foremost, that's a fireable offense if you're not going to game plan around your best offensive weapon.
Yeah.
And 2, like I was thinking about this earlier. We could literally say, every Green Bay Packer, which we'll touch on this matchup later. Every Green Bay Packer should be in your starting lineup because they're going up against the Denver Broncos. Okay. All the stats point to a legitimate reason why you should start them. And I'm not saying you should, but again, hypothetical. Denver could go out on Sunday and win 38-3. Like, just because stats say that you should doesn't mean it's actually going to happen in the real game. I get that vibe with Ramondre this week. I don't know why. Like, I feel like you have to because the stats point to it, but I don't think there's anything guaranteed when it comes to Ramondre this week.
Yeah. The one positive for Ramondre is the Bills are giving up the 10th most targets and the let me see, 6th most receiving yards to running backs, which could, if they stay out of the end zone, keep them relevant. Let's transition to the Bills side. There's 2 players on the Bills I want to talk about quickly. First is the other running back on the Bills side, James Cook. Is James Cook a start this week? Are you leaning on James Cook? Is he a guy that you're kind of like, you're probably going to have to start him no matter what? How are you feeling about James Cook?
Somewhere in that awkward in between of like, you got to play him, but also like it's James Cook. So you don't really ask any questions. And the only reason why he's in that awkward in between is just based on what we saw last week against the Giants. 14 carries, 71 yards, but 0 receptions, 0 touchdowns.
What a weird stat line for James Cook.
I know, like that's not what we expected at all. But at the same time, like that's still 5 yards of carry. So that is a typical James Cook rushing performance, but just there was no receiving work to help out or boost that in any way. So again, that's why he's in that awkward in between. It's James Cook though, in one of the best offenses that you would be. I don't think there's enough reason to not play him this week.
For sure. And then I want to give you a little bit of time because I think you've kind of retracted where your stance on Gabe Davis since our last episode. So I just want to give you a little bit of time to talk about Gabe Davis in this matchup specifically and just your thoughts on Gabe Davis in general.
I'd like to take this moment to issue a formal apology to my co-host, Lucas Wenzel. He was speaking the cold hard facts. He was speaking the truth in our last podcast episode, and I decided to play devil's advocate, and I meant it more than I wanted to, because when you look at Gabe Davis over the last 4 weeks, I shouldn't say last 4 weeks, now last 5 weeks, he had scored in 4 straight games going into week 6, and then Not only did he not score, but he only had 1 catch. And you go back and look at his stat lines, he's had 2 games where he's had more than 7 targets, I think it is, more than 5 catches, something like that. Like, you can't rely on Gabe Davis. If you're going to rely on Gabe Davis, you're betting on a touchdown pretty much. And it's the weird one because you're like, well, it's New England. Belichick likes to take away the best option on the opponent, Stephon Diggs, but Diggs does just fine against New England. So I don't like, you may be in a spot where you do kind of have to play Gabe Davis because, again, just other options available, but just know with Gabe Davis that it's not pretty. I made a mistake in my judgment about Gabe Davis. Yeah, he's not a play this week.
For sure. And I mean, it just shows our growth as men that we are able to just own our mistakes.
We are self-aware. We are sometimes we can be a little stubborn. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can choose to ignore what's right in front of us. And sometimes it takes some self-awareness, but then also some really, really good and strong co-hosts to pull you aside and go, you are just wrong.
You moron. You moron. Exactly. That's what we do. We're very strong co-hosts. In this next one, we're talking about 2 very non-strong teams, the Washington Commanders and the New York Football Giants.
I feel like this is another game you should just go do your grocery shopping during.
It's just, I don't think it's going to be super fun. Daniel Jones did practice today with his neck injury, but he is one to watch. We could see another Tyrod Taylor game. In this game, you got to start Saquon. You got to start Brian Robinson against this brutal Giants run defense. And you got to start Terry McLaurin. I think we both agree with that one.
Even if he doesn't produce, you know what he's capable of in the offense, so you still got to play him.
For sure. And he saw, I think, 11 targets, one of the double-digit targets last week.
Mm-hmm.
His teammate, Jahan Dotson's running a lot of routes, playing a lot of snaps, not seeing a lot of targets. Ty, are we in for the Jahan Dotson bounce back week this week?
No. It's so disappointing with Jahan Dotson. I mean, just when we thought that it couldn't get any worse than it did last year, and yeah, like he did have some productive games, but like you looked at the situation, you're like, can't get worse than this. Somehow it did. Like, don't know how, don't know why, but Eric Bieniemy, like, is making Jahan Dotson take a step back, and we're not saying by development, like not in a developmental way, but I'm saying like in a fantasy way, like Jahan Dotson's going backwards, and that's not what we want to see.
No. On the other side of the ball, though, this Washington pass defense is brutal.
Abysmal.
They made Justin Fields look like an MVP candidate throwing the ball. So are you looking to play roulette with one of these?
Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm like, wait a second. Is Ed Donatel the defensive coordinator in Washington at this point? Because again, like we're making Justin Fields look like an MVP. Donatel made Daniel Jones look like an MVP.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? Are you trying to play roulette with one of these Giants wide receivers? And if so, who?
I am.
Ooh, with jumping into the ring
with Wan'Dale Robinson.
Okay.
I need to pump the brakes. I shouldn't say pump the brakes. I need to like do some self-checks on myself when it comes to Wan'Dale Robinson. I am slowly but surely like going all in on Wan'Dale Robinson rest of the year. He was on a limited snap count his first couple games back from his injury. Well, I shouldn't even say that. His first game back, he was on a snap count. Second, third, and oh my goodness. Second, third, and fourth game back from his injury. He was putting up around 60% of snaps with the team. But the guy, when he's on the field, he's being targeted. And he was one of the leading target getters in weeks 4 and 5. Led the team in targets in week 6 against Buffalo with 8 targets. It doesn't matter who the quarterback is. Doesn't matter if it's Daniel Jones or if it's Tyrod Taylor. They are looking his way. And the most encouraging, and I talked about Wan'Dale in my waiver video that came out on Monday. So if you haven't checked that out, I guess it doesn't really matter because waivers are fast. But maybe some of those guys are still available. Go check it out. But the Giants wide receiver room is going through some changes right now where we are seeing less of Isaiah Hodgins. We're seeing less of Paris Campbell. We're seeing more of Jalen Hyatt. We're seeing more of Wan'Dale Robinson. And up until this point, Wan'Dale Robinson had led, I guess he still leads the Giants in targets per route run. And I said, that's great, but it doesn't really matter if you don't get a whole lot of snaps.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting more and more snaps. And he's, and on top of that, other guys are getting less snaps. So everything is trending in the right direction for Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm expecting another solid performance from Wan'Dale, and I think he's got some sneaky flex value this week.
For sure. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I feel like you got to take a chance against this Washington pass defense, and Wan'Dale Robinson coming up 8 catches on 8 targets last week, so he does feel like the guy to take a chance. Next, we got another divisional rivalry, Atlanta playing against Tampa Bay. Obviously, you're starting Bijan. You probably got to start Rachaad White in this one. Not necessarily the best matchup, but we talked about Bye-pocalypse. He's a guy that you got to throw in there. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. It's not a great matchup for them playing against this Atlanta defense, right? The Atlanta pass even has been pretty stingy. But again, they're going to be good enough to be at the very least wide receiver 3s on the week. More likely in that wide receiver 2 range. A guy that we know we should sit because we know that we should be selling high because he's just not great. It is Drake London, right, Ty? We just don't like Drake London at all. He is I'm just kidding. No, Drake London is our start for this week. I had to give Ty that. He was waiting for the wind up, but I couldn't help myself. Ty, you're saying to start Drake London this week. You're gonna try and ride the hot hand against the Tampa Bay defense?
Hot hand. I mean, this is who Drake London is. So Drake London has just been getting targets lately, and that's what he needs. That's what he needs to be productive in fantasy. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to do some fancy schmancy stat pulling here, but Tampa is
giving up the 9th most points to wide receivers on the season.
Thank you. See, there it is. I think the opportunity is an optimistic one for Drake London. Now, it is worth saying that like Drake London doesn't necessarily have the safest floor.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the matchup says to start him. Yep. That's really what it comes down to.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, since week 1, right? I think we can kind of wipe out week 1. That was everybody, like the sky was falling for Drake London, 1 target. Since then, he's averaging over eight targets a game. Since then, we've seen what we've wanted to see from Drake London, and it's been consistent. On the other side, his teammate, Kyle Pitts, I'm with you. I don't think Kyle Pitts just keeps this up. I don't think that what we saw last week from Kyle Pitts is going to be consistent. Obviously, if he's on your team, you're probably starting him. This is in the case if you picked up or drafted late a Sam Laporta, if you picked up, one of these guys off the waiver wire who has been performing well, then you probably would sit Kyle Pitts. But I would agree. I would just say I don't think Kyle Pitts continues to have a great week again this week against Tampa Bay. Ty, what are your thoughts on Kyle Pitts this week?
So we kind of touched on Kyle Pitts a little bit when we talked about Drake London as a trending player after week 6. The Falcons are starting to use Kyle Pitts a lot more as a team would use a wide receiver. Not saying that it's an exact like he's lining up outside or anything like that, but like they're using him more downfield. So I think there is a case to be made for like well, do we start treating Kyle Pitts more like a wide receiver than we do a tight end? But I also am of the belief that this is going to be a fairly low scoring game. So I don't know exactly what a Kyle Pitts performance will look like in a low scoring game. That's my worry when it comes to Kyle Pitts. And I would err on the side of probably if there's going to be a tight end that you're going to start, it's Jonnu Smith. And I can't believe I'm talking about Jonnu Smith still, but he's been arguably the number 2 option in the passing game behind Drake London so far this year.
Yeah, and you're not banking on Kyle Pitts scoring a touchdown ever.
Can I retract that real quick? The number 2 option in the passing offense is Bijan Robinson,
for sure,
and then it's Jonnu. I can't leave out Bijan like that,
for sure. Yeah, I'm not expecting a touchdown from Kyle Pitts, and I'm not really expecting him to hit over 50 yards this week. So it's not something I'm going to be confident in. And our next game before we take a quick break is going to be Detroit versus Baltimore. Obviously you're starting Lamar Jackson. Obviously you're starting Amon-Ra St. Brown, and obviously you're starting Mark Andrews. Outside of that, I would say there's not a lot of obvious ones. I think Zay Flowers is getting to that point. I think he is starting to see the volume consistently enough. Last week, I don't remember how many receptions he had. I know he was at 50 yards because we picked him to hit over 56 yards, and he was just short.
He was at 50.
50, but he did score a touchdown last week, putting him up in the double digits. So that is definitely something you want to see. And I do think if you're going to beat Detroit this year, you can't run on them. Detroit's had the best rush defense in the NFL, and so you got to throw the ball. And if Zay Flowers is the best receiving option, then obviously I think that just makes him the start almost by default. And I think we're getting close to that point where Zay Flowers is going to be an every week starter. He has clearly been better than Rashad Bateman. He has clearly been better than Odell Beckham when they're on the field together. And neither Odell Beckham or Rashad Bateman are staying on the field each week. So yeah, I got to lean Zay Flowers, but Ty, I want to ask you about the running backs in this game. Obviously, David Montgomery's looking like he's going to miss maybe a couple weeks. Jahmyr Gibbs is still questionable this week. Are you trusting any running back in this game on either side of the ball?
I think the one that is worth discussing is Jahmyr Gibbs. If he plays, he then should be taking the bulk of the workload. I mean, it happened in week 3 against Atlanta when David Montgomery didn't play. Gibbs got 17 carries. Now, the receiving work wasn't there, but again, he got 17 carries, which is by far his highest on the year. So it's a matter of, well, if he's healthy and he's going to get the workload, do we like the matchup against Baltimore? I'm not really sure. You could probably group him in with that Jerome Ford, or I shouldn't say Jerome Ford, but you're like Kareem Hunt a little bit. He feels like he's the better version of Kareem Hunt this week in terms of guys that haven't really performed up until this point, but they've had a game where they're like, well, they could again. So do we put them in the lineup? So I wonder if you just if Jahmyr Gibbs plays, you kind of have to just because of the workload. So I guess that's where I'm at. I'm not super confident in it, but the workload alone might be worth the reason to start.
For sure. I think if Jahmyr Gibbs plays, you got to start him, but I would not touch any other running back. Even if Gibbs is out, I'm not touching Craig Reynolds, and I'm definitely not touching the Baltimore running backs in this game. But with that, let's take a quick break and hear from our friends over at Underdog.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
And we're back. I think that was better. I think I'm getting closer to Lucas level at this point with that. I don't know what you think.
Yeah,
I don't
mean,
want to grade myself, but I think I'm pretty amazing.
I give myself an A+, honestly.
Just at life in general. Anyway, we'll jump just right back into it. We won't skip a beat here. We got Pittsburgh versus the Los Angeles Rams. You are starting Cooper Kupp. You're probably going to have to start George Pickens and Deontay Johnson this week. I know I'm definitely starting Deontay in the 2 leagues. I have him in. I think they're both pretty good plays. The Rams have actually been decently stingy against the pass attack. But I do think at this point in, where the week's at, those two are guys, you're going to have to start guys that you probably want to sit. Najee Harris. And let's be honest, this isn't really just a this week thing. This might be a rest of season break class in case of emergency kind of thing now on Najee. It's been terrible. Like you can't sugarcoat it at all. There has been no bright spot for Najee Harris. He does not get receiving work anymore. He doesn't break away any big runs, and he doesn't score touchdowns. I just have no optimism for Najee Harris. Ty, is there any glimpse of hope for Najee Harris moving forward?
Not in the short term, maybe in the long term. You take a look at his. I mean, we're not going to go into long term on this episode. We're going to keep it short. We're going to keep it into the next week. It's not this week. The Rams have been also very good against the run. This is just not the week for Najee. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If there's a Steelers running back that you got to play, it's Jaylen Warren. It's not Najee Harris.
For sure. And then the start, I mean, this one might feel super easy to some people. Other people are like, they need the little bit of push to put him back in your lineup, but it's Puka Nacua. He had one down week. That's it. He's still been awesome all week. Matthew Stafford only threw the ball 24 times last game. That is 15 pass attempts lower than his average on the season. So obviously targets aren't going to be, quite as great. The Steelers defense is leaky at best against the pass right now. Tyler, you have any hesitation this week starting Puka Nacua, or is it green lights?
No, it's green lights. I mean, what kind of run game are we expecting from the Rams?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like no Kyron Williams. I would not be surprised if the Rams are just going to chuck it all over the field. And that means it's good for Cooper Kupp. It's good for Puka. If you really need a deep league one, I shouldn't even say deep league because he's been rostered most of the year, but I'd even consider Tutu Atwell this week.
For sure. You know who's given up the 4th most points to fantasy wide receivers on the season?
The Steelers.
Pittsburgh Steelers, exactly. Alrighty, our next game, we got the Arizona Cardinals versus the Seattle Seahawks. This one, there are 3 Seahawks you got to start. You got to start DK. No?
Well, you do, but just it's not a
lock.
It's not a lock as it should be. I mean, just looking over his 5 games this year, 13, 17 solid, 12 and 10. Like this is not the DK that we expected at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, you're not seeing these high outburst games. To be fair, Geno hasn't looked amazing yet, right? I don't think we've quite seen the Geno of last season. JSN, though, is also taking up more snaps. We talked about that on our last podcast. Tyler Lockett's probably got to start as well in this one. Arizona's given up the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. But on the other side of the ball, Tyler, who is your start from this game? Who is that guy that people might be, I don't know. Who are you starting this week?
We're going to keep this one really, really easy. It's Hollywood Brown. There's a clear target in this Arizona offense. It's Hollywood Brown. And there really should not be much explanation other than who is Josh Dobbs going to throw the ball to? Okay. And yes, well, and this is something we should be talking about as well. Kyler Murray His activation window just opened up the day that we are recording this on Wednesday. So 21 days have officially opened. Now, that does not necessarily mean that it is a guarantee that he comes back off of the injured reserve. Chances are, since it was a Wednesday, Kyler Murray probably isn't playing. But if he is, that's even better for Hollywood Brown. So Hollywood Brown it sticks into your lineup this week, even if you don't think, even if you don't trust Josh Dobbs, even if you don't like the matchup for whatever reason, Hollywood Brown is still in your lineup.
You should like the matchup. Seahawks are giving up the most points per game to fantasy wide receivers, and they have already played Daniel Jones this year, so they had a free game in that one. They're still giving up the most points to fantasy wide receivers.
Look, if 33-year-old Adam Thielen can absolutely torch this secondary, why can't Hollywood Brown?
Exactly. And then on the other side, we'll keep this one really easy. Don't touch the Cardinals running backs. Do not. I mean, you don't even know who the necessary starter is, right? Keontae Ingram led in rush attempts, but what is it?
Amari Demercado.
That's what I'm looking for. Led in snaps. So you don't actually know what is going on already with the running backs, and it's not necessarily a super favorable matchup against the Seahawks, who are giving up, let me see, they're middle-ish of the pack against the run.
They've been a lot better as of late too,
for sure. Speaking of teams who have been bad against the run, in our next matchup we have Denver and Green Bay, who are both in the top 4 for most fantasy points allowed to running backs. Unfortunately, we can't really trust the starters of either Green Bay or Denver. But Tyler, we're still leaning running backs as the start here. Who are we leaning in this one?
Sounds weird, but if Aaron Jones is out, you probably got to start AJ Dillon. I mean, he's coming off of a season high in carries last 2 Mondays ago now, because they had a bye last week. Volume again, it's a volume thing. Like, if you know where the volume's going, should err on the side of starting. And also, I don't really want to talk about this because I'm just in shock, honestly. But Jaleel McLaughlin. Who's this Jordan McLaughlin?
I don't know. Someone typed it incorrectly in our doc.
Thanks, Lucas.
Dummy.
Jaleel McLaughlin, he led the Denver Broncos in snaps last week at the running back position. Don't know why. Don't know how, honestly, but here we are. We are talking about Jaleel McLaughlin as one of the lead backs in this Denver backfield after you had Javonte Williams come back from his injury. After you went out and signed Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin has somehow, some way become one of the lead backs in this backfield. Green Bay, not super great against the run again this year.
No.
Jaleel McLaughlin honestly should find your lineup again this week.
For sure. You're also should be starting Jordan Love this week. He had one bad week. They have the bye, and now they play Denver. And you know what? Denver is not played well. So
Denver is not good at the football.
No, not at all. So that means you should also start Christian Watson. We know it's been up and down, but he should finally be starting to actually get healthy, which means he should get targets against a bad defense. You start him.
Bye week.
On the opposite side, we would sit, at least for me, I think Courtland Sutton's definitely a sit this week. He is, we talked about with Gabe Davis being touchdown dependent. Courtland Sutton has 33% of his fantasy points this season off of touchdowns. That's the most out of any top 30 wide receiver in the NFL. And now they play Green Bay, who is top 7 defense against or fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, and they're only allowing 10 fantasy points a game to outside wide receivers.
Ooh,
and it's just not a good sign for Courtland Sutton, who plays strictly on the outside. I'm not going to bank on him scoring a touchdown again. I'm not banking on him keeping up this run, and if he doesn't score a touchdown again, it's going to be very difficult for him to see double-digit fantasy points. Ty, do you have any interest in Courtland Sutton in this one?
this is how I'll explain my thoughts on Courtland Sutton this week. In one of my leagues, I have the choice between Wan'Dale Robinson and Courtland Sutton, and I'm starting Wan'Dale Robinson.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it.
It is as simple as that.
Gotta love it. We'll move on to a more exciting game, let's say. Los Angeles Chargers versus Kansas City. This will be a great way for Brandon Staley to show how good of a coach he is. Good decision maker. But Tyler, you're starting Herbert, you're starting Mahomes, you're starting Travis Kelce, you're starting Keenan Allen. But there's a start, and I want to give you the floor on this guy. You have been pushing this agenda for Mr. Isaiah Pacheco onto me and Lucas nonstop lately. So here's the floor. Why are you starting Isaiah Pacheco this week?
Isaiah Pacheco was my honorary fourth flag plant because I couldn't make room for him when I was talking about Tony Pollard, when I was talking about Drake London, when I was talking about David Montgomery. But Isaiah Pacheco so far this year has really kind of separated himself as the guy in the backfield for the Chiefs. And I think one of the concerns that I saw last year concerning the Chiefs was the volatility in their backfield. And they started giving Isaiah Pacheco more snaps. And that's ironically when Kansas City started playing better ball. Not saying that's the reason, but it's a very big reason. Okay. So going into year two, Isaiah Pacheco, I was thinking, well, why would it would be negligent of Kansas City to not give Isaiah Pacheco more touches because they found success when he was in the game. And sure enough, that's where we are at this year. This week against the Chargers, I cannot express how good of a matchup this is. I know the Chargers have been a little bit better against the run as of late, but this is still the same Chargers defense that I had the stats somewhere. Where was it? Where is it? Sorry. Technical difficulties on this co-host side. And that's embarrassing because this is my guy. It is. The Chargers have had 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. I'm just going to pull that right off the top of my head. 3 or 4 weeks in fantasy points allowed to running backs when they finished or when they were top 12 in that category. Kansas City, yes, they can beat you with Patrick Mahomes, but if there's one thing that's actually working for them right now, it's the run game. And this matchup against the Chargers is a very, very solid one. It's very, very good for Isaiah Pacheco. Start him up with confidence. I feel like we are just past the, is Isaiah Pacheco a reliable option in fantasy football? He is at this point, and you'll see it again this week against the Chargers.
Yeah, you have to look at him like that. On the opposite side of the ball, our sit is going to be Josh Palmer. Kansas City is giving up the 7th least amount of points to fantasy wide receivers. They are actually just behind Green Bay by less than a full fantasy point a game. So if that's the case, Keenan Allen's going to get his. He's going to see a ton of targets. So Josh Palmer would probably be the guy that'd take a little bit of a back seat. I do think he is a safer start than Gabe Davis, than Courtland Sutton this week. Guys like that, just because he has at least seen decent enough volume. It hasn't been great. All right. I mean, he's not setting the world on fire or anything, but I would stay away from Josh Palmer if I could.
Do you want to hear a really fun fact?
I would love to hear a really fun fact.
Since Mike Williams picked up his torn ACL in week 3, so from week 4 on, guess who leads the Chargers in target share?
Who is that?
Josh Palmer.
No way.
28% in the last 3 weeks to Keenan Allen's 25. And it's really 2 weeks because they had a bye week, but
that's pretty wild.
It's wild. But still understand that the matchup is severely going to limit Josh Palmer. And I will say this, you don't get points for targets in fantasy football.
That's
so while you do see the targets in there, that should be a reason for optimism in the long term, not a reason to force them into your lineup in the short term.
For sure. I like that. Optimism in the long term. Don't force them in your lineup in the short term. Great work, Ty. Fantastic work.
Thank you.
We got 2 matchups left, and I think at least one of them is going to be really exciting. The other one maybe not, but one of these is going to be exciting, and that is Miami versus Philadelphia. There's a lot of obvious starts in this one for me. You're starting both quarterbacks. You're starting A.J. Brown. You're starting Tyreek Hill. You're starting Jalen Waddle. You're starting Raheem Mostert, and you're starting DeAndre Swift. Right? Mostert doesn't have a great matchup this week. The Eagles have been good against the run. But are you really going to try and bench the starting running back for the best running attack in football right now? I really hope not, because if you bench Raheem Mostert, he is 100% guaranteed to score 36 fantasy points.
That's just how it works, right?
And if you bench him, he'll make you hurt. But the Eagles do have a wide receiver who has been struggling as of late, been disappointing. Struggling from a fantasy perspective is how I'll put it, because I agree with you, Ty. I don't think he's necessarily struggling on the field, and I don't even think it's necessarily his fault. But from a fantasy perspective, Devonta Smith has not been great. Devonta Smith, if you drafted him in the second, third round, you've been really disappointed these last 2 weeks. But man, it really feels like this is the week he turns it around. Lucas dropped a stat in his buy low video today that Devonta Smith had the second most unrealized air yards last year. He's still seeing, last game, he's still seeing the targets. He's still, he's still getting having the ball thrown to him downfield. It just wasn't connecting. Ty, do you have anything you want to add on Devonta Smith? The one caveat I will add real quick on Devonta Smith. He was limited today in practice with a hamstring injury. So that is something to monitor. But I think that Devonta Smith is a start. Ty, are you agreeing with me, or is this a smile of disagreement?
No, this is just a smile of just checking in on my friend, because it has been a wild ride for you, my friend, and your love for Devonta Smith. But no, I'm with you. You still start him. I mean, I know performances haven't been there, but name value, like just conceptualize this real quick. I am going to sit Devonta Smith, who is one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver 2s in the league, would be wide receiver 1 on his own team. Talent is there. Offense is there. I shouldn't say is there, but you know the talent of this offense. Why would you sit him? Even if you know that he could disappoint, why would you sit him? That's where I'm at.
For sure. Another pass catcher on this Eagles team is Dallas Goedert. And this one is a little more tricky because, Ty, we've kind of brought it up. We kind of chatted about it before we started talking. It does feel like it's, at this point, an A.J. Brown week and then either a Devonta Smith or Dallas Goedert week. I know that if Hurts is playing up to his capability, we could have all three perform in 1 week. I mean, obviously you're not going to have the tight end 1 overall, wide receiver 1 overall, and wide receiver 2 overall, but have good enough performances for both of them. Do you think this is a week where we could see a Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert week, or where are you leaning on Dallas Goedert?
I feel like you got to play both and just understand the reality that typically when one succeeds, the other doesn't. And obviously you want to be on the right side of that, but I don't think there's any stat, there's any kind of argument that I could make or you can make or really anyone can make to say, don't play either of these guys. Like it really is just bet on the offense, bet on a high scoring game, bet on whatever, but just understand either one of those guys may not deliver the way that you want them to. And guess what? That's fantasy football.
Yeah.
It happens. Okay. I know that we're getting to a point in the season where things like this do matter and they count because they ultimately can decide a matchup for you. Sometimes you just got to stick it out a little bit.
Yep.
You just got to battle through. Battle through sounds way extreme, but sometimes you just kind of have to accept the fact that your guy isn't as consistent, isn't as safe as you would want him to be.
For sure. And now we have the Monday night matchup.
Do we really have to talk about this game?
Ty, is there any optimism? Could this game be close? I'm not saying could the Vikings win against San Francisco, but could this game be close this week?
Okay, hold on. Let's just think about this as Vikings fans, okay? The 49ers could be without Deebo Samuel, could be without Christian McCaffrey,
Trent Williams,
could be without Trent Williams. And somehow, some way, Jordan Mason can run for 5 touchdowns and Brock Purdy could throw for 10. That's what it's like to be a Vikings fan. That reality, maybe not to that extreme, but that reality that how are we getting torn apart by Brock Purdy and Jordan Mason?
Yeah.
That is a legitimate possibility. So as much as I want this to be a win for the Vikings, as much as I want this to be a close game, it doesn't really matter if you have a 49ers player. Still play them as if they are like, as if it's a regular week, right? Where they are full powered, everything, fully healthy, all of that. I'm worried for this game because I know that Kyle Shanahan is going to absolutely carve this team open.
Yeah. So our obvious starts, we said, CMC, even if he plays, you start him. Hawkinson, if he plays, Hawkinson's going to play Ayuk, Kittle. The one I do want to ask is Deebo, because we did see Deebo get banged up earlier, come back, be used pretty much just as a decoy. Are you worried about all that, or are you just saying, you know what, if Deebo's on the field, I got to start him?
It's kind of the same as Devonta Smith, honestly, for me. Like, yeah. If you were to bench Deebo Samuel, I want to hear your logic, because I don't think that logic is sound enough to ultimately decide that Deebo Samuel, who is one of the best weapons in all of football, should be on your bench in fantasy football.
There you go. I don't hate that. I like that. We're going to keep these starts and sits for this game really short and sweet. They're Vikings. You're starting Jordan Addison, and I think with Justin Jefferson out, Jordan Addison's got to be a guy you start every single week. He is a guy who's been very touchdown dependent. We will put that out there. He's in that Gabe Davis, Courtland Sutton tier, but he's also a guy, unlike those two, who you're projecting to see more targets as the season goes on, right? He's still, he's only played 6 games in his entire NFL career, right? He's still learning the offense. He's still learning how the game works. But on the opposite side, Alexander Mattison, you don't want to trust him in a game where they're going to be behind to power through a very good front 7 of the San Francisco 49ers. And so, yeah, he would be my sit of this week. And you really don't know if Cam Akers is going to emerge or not. Ty, do you have anything to add on either of those two?
No, not really. I
figured you didn't want to talk too much about it.
No, I'm more because I'm worried. But again, look at the matchup. I know the Browns just did what they did against the Niners. The Vikings are not the Browns. It really is as simple as that.
And it wasn't exactly an offensive outpouring by the Browns either, right?
It was 19 points.
Yeah, so you're not super excited about that. But yeah, that wraps that up. Ty, let's do some full fellas fade. So I think a round of applause is deserved for you and Lucas last week. You were without your bad luck charm. I have been just devastatingly poor this year. I don't know what's going on. I have had multiple hit on my personal. I've had, when we talk about them outside of this, I'm fine. But when I put one on the show, there is no chance it has hit so far. So I'm hoping to turn it around, hoping that we can string it together 2 weeks in a row.
Do you know when you asked me how I'm feeling about going into week 7, and I was like, I'm worried. I'm actually really worried.
You're worried because of this?
I'm worried because of this.
Because I'm going to screw it up. I hope your guy has 0 receiving yards.
I'm on an absolute tear right now. I don't want to brag, but I'm going to. I'm 4 for 4 on my last place. Okay. I'm 4 for 4.
Ty, you just brag, so that means that you're missing this one. That's how it works.
I know.
You better not, though, because your player is holding together like 3 of my fantasy teams right now. So if he goes down, I'm in trouble. But Ty, give it to us. Who is your play of the week at the full fellas fade?
You can find this line. I don't know if you said this already, but you can find this line only at Underdog Fantasy. Use the code fellas to get your first deposit matched. Shout out to Underdog. Thank you. But Mark Andrews has a 58.5 yard receiving line on Underdog Fantasy. Going up against Detroit, Detroit's allowing the third most receptions, the fourth most receiving yards, the fifth most fantasy points to tight ends per game this year. And if you go, well, Detroit has been winning and tight ends haven't really been doing a whole lot against them in recent weeks. Let's just take a look at these games real quick. Jonnu Smith hit his first double-digit point total against Detroit. Week 4, then Detroit played Green Bay, where Luke Musgrave got hurt like in the first quarter, early second quarter, something like that. Week 5, Detroit played Carolina, and they didn't really do a whole lot because guess what? Carolina just doesn't use their tight ends anymore. Week 6, Detroit, they played Tampa Bay. And guess who also doesn't utilize their tight ends in the receiving game?
Yep,
Tampa Bay. It's Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends, who is he's still the number one option in that Baltimore passing offense going up against this kind of matchup with Detroit. I like the hire for Mark Andrews this week. You found the sound.
I did. I get so worried because it's not labeled correctly in our sound bank. So I get very nervous. But that is Mark Andrews higher than 58.5 receiving yards from Tyler. I am going to take Kenneth Walker higher than 77.5 rushing yards this week against Arizona. Walker has hit this line in the last 2 weeks, and Arizona is allowing the 5th most rushing yards to running backs. So I'm not going to explain it much more than that. I think that one's pretty easy. So Kenneth Walker higher than 77.5 rushing yards. Lock it in. Remember, you can tail us over on Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code fellas when you do to get your welcome deposit match. And why don't you drop in the comments your Underdog plays of the week? We'd love to see them from you guys, what you guys are thinking moving forward. But anyways, that wraps up the show for us today. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the FFLs, on Twitter at FFLs, on YouTube and TikTok at Fantasy Football Fellas. If you're listening to the audio podcast, thank you for tuning in. Leave us a little review. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. Just tell us what you like about the show.
We can take constructive criticism. Okay?
But yeah, we love to hear your guys' feedback. And YouTube, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification button. But thank you again for listening. Ty will actually surprise everybody and be out tomorrow with the must starts of the week. And with that, we will see you later next week. Deuces.